Hello all, this is the Owl, and, well, let's get 2024 started with a bang. Yup, much as 2023 was the year of both Baby Owl and Season 1, although I guess you could say the first arc, 2024 will be all about the second arc of Made in Abyss, as in Season 2 of the anime. Wait, do manga come in seasons? Let me know in the comments if manga come in seasons. And yeah, much as last time, we are going to be going in hard here because, while I know some people prefer the first season, this is where it all really came together for me. Now, before we start, a few things. First up, we're not going to be doing recaps, as apparently people really don't enjoy them, even if they can just skip past, so we're going to be barreling along right ahead. If you haven't read this thing, or watched the anime, or watched some other analysis, or Mickle Pickle's amazing animated things, or read a synopsis, or had it spoiled by mates, or experienced the story of Season 1 in some other way, I would strongly recommend watching my deep dive on it here, also linked in the description. Secondly, Season 2 is more. A lot more. It's a lot more confusing, it's a lot more mysterious, it's a lot more abstract, it's a lot more disturbing, and it's a lot more, well, explicit. Not just in terms of the gore, but in terms of the nudity. I am not kidding, I predict that once again, half of my editing is going to be spending time censoring out itty-bitty monster titties, especially when it comes to this sodding character. So, what does this mean? Well, firstly, as with Season 1, I am going to be acting for the most part as if everything past Season 2 does not exist. Twins, giant cat lady, and all. Secondly, I will almost certainly make mistakes here and there, as I did with Season 1, because this is a very complicated and at times confusing, and either way extremely abstract manga, sometimes bordering on the surreal, that does not spell things out for the reader whatsoever mostly, and thirdly, certain concepts like value we won't be going too far into, as they're just extremely messy. I would highly recommend you go and watch Pooty Spaghetti's videos on this stuff, as they focus more on that side of things. Aside from that, as I've discussed before, because Season 2 is so incredibly complicated, and there's so much to say about it, this is going to be a rather long series of videos. Definitely longer than Season 1. Don't worry, once we're all done, they will be put into one massive video. And in the meantime, I'll be making a special playlist for Season 2. Oh, and one last thing. Season 1 is dark. Sure, Season 2, however, is way, way darker. There is stuff in here, particularly Volume 8, that may be some of the darkest material that I have encountered in an officially released and translated manga that isn't Higurashi. You have been warned. I will also be censoring liberally, not just boobs, but also gore, because YouTube has become even stricter on this stuff since last year. I would like to say just go and buy and read the manga yourself, but as some of you have pointed out, I probably shouldn't, due to the fact that some of the content here is, let's say, objectionable. I would rather say that, despite its imperfections, the anime is perfectly serviceable, so go and check that out, and that the manga is only for those with extremely strong stomachs, and not just in terms of violence. And with that obnoxiously long piece of admin taken care of, it's time to dive. Volume 6 opens with events an indeterminate time ago, and we see a small portion of matters that we heard about early in Volume 1. Riko has smuggled a huge and frigging adorable doggo into the orphanage. A dog called Reg. This, yeah, okay. As Vulpalox talks about in his incredible theory, which I did a video on some time ago, linked in the description, this might mean nothing, it might be Tsukushi trolling the hell out of us, or it might be something incredibly important. We'll see. And yeah, Season 2 jumps around in time quite a bit more than Season 1 did. Now, before we really get going here, if you've only watched the anime, this might seem a bit off to you, and there's a reason for that. The anime actually moves the narrative around a bit to create a more linear chronology, while the manga sort of starts in one place, then goes back in time, then back to the present, and then back and forth a bit. I actually like the way the manga tells the story better, but I will do my best to make it as easy to understand as possible, and yeah, folks who have read this thing know that's not an easy task. Anyway, cutting back to the party, we see them approach the altar of the absolute boundary, now equipped with a white whistle and preparing to head down past Edo Front and the point of no return, heading deep into the mysterious lower abyss of layers 6 and 7, their final dive. Yes, Season 2 will be almost entirely concerned with layer 6. We get a fair bit of small talk, and then the elevator-like relic begins to descend as Riko begins to realize how her white whistle works. It can interact with abyssal relics, and as with so much during this initial bit, keep it in mind for later. It will be important. As they descend through the massive subterranean sea of Layer 5, they pass by all sorts of crazy stuff, including this amazing Lovecraftian monstrosity. And yeah, this is all foreshadowing just how bizarre and bloody nasty the creatures below are going to get. As they descend, they encounter a layer of crystallized bones at the bottom of the sea, revealing Layer 5's namesake. It's all very ominous and eerie, and I love how the panels are structured in a way to suggest both claustrophobia and downwards motion. I've talked about this before, but I have a massive feathery hard-on for creative use of paneling to tell a story. It's one of the few things completely unique to the comic or manga medium, and it's not something you see done a lot. Tsukushi and I guess Alan Moore are the legitimate masters of this. As they descend, we see a pretty awesome little map showing their route and progress thus far, a lot of which you'd see later in the game, and after a while, the lift exits out into a bizarre, almost non-Euclidean space, the immense and incredibly alien Layer 6. We have arrived. And yeah, as I mentioned in my original series on this, which please don't go and watch that again, the audio is so bad, although I do kind of miss the trains. Layer 6 is where the art goes from amazing to gobsmackingly gorgeous. I mean, just look at this. The detail, the way the lines pull your eyes around in all sorts of weird directions, but always lead down to the tiny party at the bottom. Yeah, while I don't want this to be a comparison between the manga and the anime, as, once again, I do kind of recommend the anime for content reasons, this is one thing that really bothered me, in that the anime made Layer 6 feel so much more cramped and mundane than it did in the manga. What can you do? Anyway. As they begin to explore the area, we realize that it's mostly incredibly ancient ruins, partially crystallized, but also destroyed. A city of gold, in fact. And this, as we'll see in Volume 8, is almost certainly a nod to a number of real-life doomed expeditions to find El Dorado or similar legendary lost cities. It doesn't take long, however, for Nanachi to warn the party about nearby consciousnesses, likely monsters, beginning to show an interest in them. Yeah, it's time to make camp and take refuge. Sure enough, they soon spot an absolutely titanic creature, a turbinid dragon, the impossibly powerful, near indestructible, highly aggressive rulers of Layer 6. And we'll be getting to know these things pretty well later on, as well as some of the other bizarre and at times surreal creatures down this deep. Oh right, I'll be going with the official manga translation rather than the anime, and there are a few differences in nomenclature and pronunciation, so if something's different, that's why. But yeah, these things are great fun. Somewhere between a fulmar, a snail, and a seahorse, which makes sense. One term for a seahorse in Japanese can be translated as dragon child, and turbinid refers to a species of snail. Tsukushi really does pull a lot of inspiration from actual zoology for his primeval monsters, and it's fun pulling them apart. Anyway, they continue exploring and making their way into the lair when they are forced to flee by some sort of massive geothermal explosion. Layer 6 is even less hospitable to life than Layer 5, and that takes some doing. Eventually, the party makes camp and prepares food, using a hatchling creature, Bondrude's energy rations, and some other stuff in a sequence that made me mildly ill. And yes, Mrs. Owl will one day do her Made in Abyss cooking video, I promise. Regardless, with that done, Riko begins to wax nostalgic for the orphanage, so far away and high above, missing her friends, Nat, Shiggy, and Kiyui, as well as her mentors, Jiruo and Hablog. Yeah, this right here is the thing about Tsukushi's writing. I know some people find these little interludes to be overlong and pointless, some even calling them filler, but they not only serve to help us to get to know the characters a bit and understand the dynamics within the party, they serve the very important purpose of providing contrast. As I mentioned in my recent Kazuo Umezu video, if you make your story all dark or all weird all the time, eventually the reader gets used to it, like a cold swimming pool. But if you switch it up by periodically dumping warm water on people, yeah, this analogy is breaking down already. In the case of the narrative, by introducing some levity and slow moments, you not only stop this from happening, but you also make us care about the characters more, and thus, when something bad happens to them, it makes it hit really hard. Tsukushi is the master at this, giving us just enough levity to keep us engaged, but then slowly tweaking the dials to amp up our anxiety and our fear, knowing that there is always bad stuff on the horizon. We continue with the interlude and learn that Nanachi actually has some pretty impressive artistic chops as they attempt to send a letter back to the surface to let everyone know they're fine, for a given value of fine, I guess. But even their pretty substantial precautions to ward creatures off does absolutely nothing. Yeah, Orzen wasn't kidding when she said that the creatures down this deep are something else entirely. Eventually though, they bed down in a collapsed tower, with Reg deploying his arm trap as usual, and snuggled up to a big fluffy pillow called Nanachi, they all fall asleep. Nanachi wakes first, due to Reg chewing on her tail in his sleep. Okay, that's pretty funny. And finds, that's not good. Her drawing of the party, taken by that flying creature, which, yes, I'm sure is called something, has been returned. Only it's also been defaced. Nanachi has been crossed out, and someone has drawn what looks like a crude inverted stick figure over Reg. Riko soon wakes and realizes that her whistle has been stolen from around her neck. They quickly ascertain that this is all worse than it first appears. Whoever did this was able to retrieve the picture from the huge flying monster intact, sneak up on them through Reg's arm trap without any issue, and completely bypass Nanachi's special senses. All of this without them realizing. They immediately strike off in hot pursuit, with Reg tracking Prushka via her scent. Soon they encounter, a pair of animal carcasses, stuffed full of hair with their rectums sewn up. Hair that turns out to be from the party. Wow, I didn't know you got Blair Witches down this deep. Don't worry, most of this will be explained later, and it isn't quite what it seems. Still creepy though. Refusing to be intimidated, the party pushes forward, and they begin finding huge, deeply set bipedal tracks, moving in the direction of Prushka's scent. What the hell? How did this thing sneak up on them? They follow for some time, and eventually encounter an absolutely massive mountain of some sort, rising up from the plains, and set in its side a large cave, festooned with bones. Above its entrance, that ominous inverted figure symbol. As with so many things in this arc, keep this symbol in mind for later, as this will also be kind of explained. As they approach, they realize that the strange mountain is, in fact, the absolutely colossal, long-dead carcass of some bizarre Lovecraftian creature, with an immense tubular body stretching up to a ridiculous height, and huge, root-like appendages grounding it. Feeling a great and understandable deal of trepidation, the party makes their way along the long, rickety walkway, unbelievably high above the plains below. And as they get closer, they hear the sound of distant muffled muttering and begin to get the sense that someone or something is watching them. They also realize that to enter the monster, they would need to pass through and enter an even creepier area, a Leviathan passage hung with endless human-looking bones, before entering out into something truly beyond belief. At the center of the great carcass, a mind-bogglingly massive cavern, and within that cavern, a village. Welcome to Iruburu. No, I refuse to call this place Iblu or Ilbu, and yes, if you look carefully, there is a definite skull motif here. Deep beneath the earth, they have discovered the hidden village of the Hollows, and this is where we'll be spending most of the season. Yes, this is another area where the anime feels a bit different. The manga makes Iruburu look incredibly grand and intimidating, while in the anime it looks like a middling hippie festival in the desert, or perhaps some kind of hardcore furry camping event. Although that would be pretty intimidating in its own right. You know I kid. As they make their way in, they are watched by 3 figures. A strange horned creature in robes. Something that looks way too much like a vagina and butthole for me not to point it out. And a long serpentine thing. As with so many things, don't worry about it. We will learn a great deal about this trio in due course. Soon, they are confronted by yet another strange creature, who we later learn is called Majikaja. And yes, I am going to be calling him Kaja from now on because that is a phonetic car crash of a name. This guy is even more odd than his appearance would suggest, as he's actually a sentient gas contained within a system of bladders and pipes. Very Grant Morrison, who, yes, used the term smart fart, and that still gets a chuckle out of me. Kaja explains that Prushka, the whistle, or as he refers to her, it. What are the pronouns of a whistle? This manga makes my brain squeak sometimes. As your worth, as well as a life-reverberating stone, was indeed brought here, and that he will take them to find it. Her, let's go with her. On their way, they begin to attract more and more attention from the bizarre residents of Iruburu, including... Wait, does that creature have a butt for a head? Oh, Tsukushi. And the curse/force field simply does not exist within the village. The membrane they passed through as they entered seems to separate the part of the abyss with the force field. That's such a strange term. And this special segment where it does not exist. And this means that the party are free to move upwards at will without getting mittied. Yes, yet again, keep this in mind for much, much later, as it coincides with what I consider to be the single saddest, most tragic moment in this entire horribly depressing manga, well, thus far. We'll get there. As they go, Reg and Riko inquire of Nanachi as to what the hell these creatures are, and even she's pretty much stumped. They do indeed look like hollows, possibly even blessed hollows, but there's a lot of them, and their forms are so strange and so specific. Not the furry bait things we've seen when the blessing is forced via Bondrud's machine, or even what he turned into that, well, she just sort of shrugs. Yeah, we will learn more about what the hell is going on here later, and because it's made an abyss, it's both somehow really confusing and really twisted. Again, we'll get more about this when we eventually tackle Volume 8. Let's just say that the crack I made about Behelitz way back in my Season 1 video will make a lot more sense then. Now, this next bit is very interesting. They find Prushka being chipped away at by a crab-like hollow, and while Reg is appalled, Riko tells him that Prushka doesn't mind. Kaja explains that a white whistle must be refined before it can truly be useful, converted from that weird heart shape into an actual instrument. This is also when we are first introduced to the concept of value, which will be a running theme in Season 2, and is really dense and really confusing. We will go into it a little bit later on, but once again, I would strongly recommend you watch Pooty Spaghetti's video on this stuff. This does make me wonder though, does this mean that all the white whistles pass through Iruburu to have their whistles refined, as all of them have this fine, specific shape? Because, yeah, that just raises further questions. We do learn that the villagers are indeed hollows, and as we'll find out later, hollows are even more complex than has been previously indicated. As Kaja shows them around, they enter a marketplace, and Riko is astonished to see the belongings of cave raiders, including, in an astonishing coincidence, something that looks very much like her mother's work. But when she touches it, this provokes an intense reaction from the shopkeep. Kaja goes on to explain that even touching something with value without permission is a very serious offense here. The village begins to take on a somewhat more threatening tone, as when Riko asks how she would go about buying stuff, Kaja tells her that her possessions probably aren't of any value. Instead, she could sell body parts or organs, which appalls Riko, to which Kaja immediately apologizes. Yeah, Iruburu takes value very, very seriously. Oh, and the money here has that inverted figure on it. Reg, however, in a surprisingly astute moment, realizes that all of this has very neatly distracted them from the issue of who exactly messed with them in their sleep and took Prushka. But, and this is also interesting and very, very important, Kaja goes on to explain a little bit about how hollows work. Their forms, you see, are not arbitrary. They are in fact forged around desires of some kind, some direct, but often fairly abstract. For instance, a hollow that likes to cut things might get big bladed pincers, and this is often interpreted as explaining why Nanachi, as an even better example, smells nice. She was a street urchin constantly reeking of garbage. However, he also hints that something else is in play here, differentiating Nanachi from the villagers as, I guess you could say, a true hollow. Once again, as I've said so many times in this video already, we will learn more about this later. So don't fret if you are a little bit confused at this point. As they are surrounded by villagers, Riko encounters another very odd hollow, even by the standards of this place, Ma, who immediately shows an almost childlike interest in mania. And this, oh boy, this heralds the first truly made in abyss moment of this volume, and I guess this season. Be warned, things are about to get nasty. So, this sequence involves a set of situations that should be immediately identifiable for a lot of folks, as Riko and Co are surrounded by curious but vaguely threatening hollows who fairly soon snatch Mania away. And yeah, as anyone who's had a pet suddenly co-opted by an aggressive younger child will attest, this results in a genuinely tense and honestly pretty upsetting sequence where Ma and several other hollows treat the poor little creature far too roughly, pulling it about and manhandling it, and then I will spare you the extremely graphic moment where Ma accidentally squeezes it too hard, causing Mania to suffer a prolapse from the anus, as well as an orbital exoneration, meaning an eye almost pops out. This gets even more intense when Riko, much as a kid would do, freaks out to a reproachful Ma's terror. Kaja asks Riko what Mania's value was, and forgetting what she'd learned about Iruburu, and how seriously touching things with value sans permission, especially if this results in that value decreasing, is taken here, makes the very unwise decision to say that she is impossibly, irreplaceably valuable. Much as, yes, a naive child might do when they feel hurt or slighted. And yeah, folks who've read this or watched the anime before know what's coming, as it leads to this bit. In another sequence that I probably can't show too much of, trust me, it is graphic. A Shoggoth-like thing rises up around Ma, seemingly from the very essence of the village itself, and begins to rip into her, tearing, oh bloody hell, several stuffed animals out of her body. I know that this is highly disputed, but in my opinion, there is at least a fairly high probability that Ma might have been a toddler before transforming. The walk, the lack of speech, the odd affect, the love for stuffed animals, and the way she handled mania, to name a few. So this is just all sorts of horrible, and especially now, as a father to a child nearing toddler age, frigging difficult to get through, especially as the black goo begins partially flaying Ma. Nanachi is visibly traumatized, and Reg is aghast, with Riko utterly horrified by what she, due to extremely poor judgment, set in motion, begging Kaja to make it stop. He tells her that he can't, and that the balancing will continue until morale improves. I mean, until an equilibrium of value has been achieved. And then, suddenly extremely threatening, looks directly at Riko and asks if maybe she might have overstated Mania's value. Yup, the village is not a place for casual or thoughtless words, especially as so far as value is concerned. As the now eviscerated and half-flayed Ma's body parts are traded for by the crowd, this part really does not sit well with me, and I wish I could tell you that Season 2 gets better. Fortunately though, it will soon get at least 1,000% more awesome. You'll see what I mean. Now, before we end this bit, there are two things that I want to mention here at the halfway point of the volume, as they are pretty damn interesting. The first is this pair of twin characters, Shirumi and Minae, who appear in these in-between chapter segments from time to time. I'm not going to delve too much into these characters at this point, but let's just say, and yeah, this could have been the title for this video, this will be important later, so remember it. We will get there, but not for a good long while. Secondly, this entire village arc and some of the stuff that'll happen towards the end of the volume makes me wonder if Tsukushi is trying to express a very common phobia in Japan, and one that is often perceived by outsiders as another example of Japanese insularism or even xenophobia, but in reality is more a byproduct of a highly regimented and propriety-based society. The fear of going somewhere new where you don't understand all the unwritten rules and either making a complete mule of yourself or causing serious trouble without realizing it. Junji Ito also touches on this one a fair bit. It's something that I have often encountered working over there, especially when I was preparing exchange students heading to the USA or to the UK for homestay programs. So, who knows? Anyway, before we finish for the day, I want to give a huge thanks, as always, to my fantastic patrons: Cheddar, Jake Reagan, Piece of Yeast, Elspresso, Cheffel Satanist, Starwin Marwin, Question Man 6, Kel Core, Jacob Ramsey, Crazy, Opinion Custard, Wargle, Hunting for R2D2, Inukia Koji, Rose Montgomery, Lance Goebel, Rafferty, Erin Arnold, The Hedgehog Gamer, Simone, XTC Pill, Cobalt Worm, B Empress, Jake, Ranger Danger, and Cheshire Quill. If you want to see more like this, why not stick around? Subscribe, bell, you know the drill, all that good YouTube stuff. If you want to hear me say your name, get early access to most of my videos, as well as some unique patron videos, have some nifty perks on the Discord, and help Mrs. Owl and I out or buy Baby Owl a present, and ensure that I can keep on doing what I do, why not take a look at our Patreon? If you want to chit-chat about, well, basically anything, drop by our Discord. It's really, really great over there. Take care, my friends, and cheers. This is the Owl, signing off.